In today's lesson, we'll be looking at inverses of matrices. Our objectives will be to introduce the identity matrix, introduce the inverse matrix, and to calculate an inverse matrix. So let's begin by looking at the identity matrix. Before we start talking about identities with matrices, though, let me remind you what you already know about identity elements. If I ask you to fill in the blank on this statement that I have on the screen right now, what would you tell me to put in the blank? Well, hopefully you would say that that's a 1. That 1 has a special name. It's called the identity element of multiplication. And what that means is, if I multiply that 4 by 1, I get back what I started with. Would it matter if this had been a 7? If I multiply it by 1, I would get a 7. If it had been a 42 and I multiply by 1, I get a 42. So that is called the identity element of multiplication. When you multiply using the identity element, you get back what you started with. Now, let's look at that then in terms of matrices. What I want to show you next is the identity matrix for a 2 by 2 matrix. It looks like this. You always have 1s on the diagonal going this direction and 0s everywhere else. A 3 by 3 identity looks like this. 1s on the diagonal and 0s everywhere else. You could go on and create, I didn't do it for you, but you could create a 4 by 4 identity matrix. It would have 1s on the diagonal and 0s everywhere else. Well, since we know that now, let me ask you this question. What do you think you would get if you multiplied this matrix times the identity matrix? Well, just like up here you got back what you started with, that holds true right here. And if you don't believe me, you may want to grab your calculator, multiply those right quick, and just check to make sure. But it does work. Let's go a step further with this now and introduce inverses. Well, once again, I want to begin with a concept that you're familiar with. If I wanted to multiply 4 times some number and get 1, what I'm looking for is what we call the multiplicative inverse. When you multiply the 4 times its multiplicative inverse, what you get is the identity element. Well, the same would hold true here if I had 7 times, and its multiplicative inverse is 7, so that's equal to the identity element. Well, let's talk about this now in terms of matrices. What I'm asking you, if I ask you to calculate an inverse for me, is I'm looking for the matrix that goes right here, that when I multiply these together, I would get the 2 by 2 identity matrix. This is what I'm asking you for. Now, calculating that manually would not be easy, but what we're going to do is use the calculator to do that. So we'll enter our matrix. It's a 2 by 2, so go on and enter that one. And then what we'll do is, once you have it entered, remember second quit to get out of entering it. You'll select matrix A, and then once you've selected matrix A, you'll do the inverse key, which is located on that left-hand side right below the math key. It's the button that has x raised to the -1 power. Well, what it's going to do is take the inverse of your matrix. It'll do all the work for you, comes back, gives you the inverse matrix. Well, it's ugly decimals, so I went on and changed it into fractions so that you could see that a little better. Now, what that tells me is this. If I took this matrix right here and plugged it in right here, then what I would get when I multiplied is the identity matrix. This one right here is called the inverse of this matrix. Now, in higher level mathematics, this means a whole lot more to us. Today, we're going to simply focus on doing the calculations. If you continue on in math beyond this course, you may need to use that later on. Let's do another one now. And this time we're going to look at a 3 by 3. I'm still looking for what matrix goes right here so that when I multiply those two together, I get the identity matrix for a 3 by 3 matrix. Well, let's start and let our calculators do the work. We'll enter our matrix, second quit to stop that, and then we will tell it we want to find the inverse of that matrix. Calculator will once again do the work for you, and this is your inverse matrix for this. Not at all what you would expect, probably. I think very few of us would have said, I would have guessed that. But that's how we'll do it. And as I said before, in these lessons, we're simply going through the calculations of how to do this. In higher level math, you would find out how to use it. That's all I have for you today on inverses. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.